3 months ago, I learned that my parents had walked into a living room that wasn't mine and swung baseball bats until glass, wood, and drywall stopped looking like a home. They thought they were erasing my life. The police report described it differently: forced entry, criminal mischief, property damage estimated at $40,000. The address on the report was familiar. It used to be mine. I read the report twice, then again, more slowly. The timestamp was 9:47 p.m. A neighbor had called it in. The responding officer listed items destroyed in sequence: front window, coffee table, television, interior door. There was a note about spray paint, another about a bat recovered at the scene. I imagined my father's grip, the weight he prefers in tools. I imagined my mother standing back, directing, correcting. I did not imagine my own furniture. It wasn't my furniture anymore. When the officer called, he asked if I was safe. He asked if I knew Wade and Susan Smith. He asked if 847 Maple Street meant anything to me. I told him I had sold the house a month earlier. He paused. I could hear paper moving. He asked me to confirm the date of sale. I gave him the closing date and the name of the title company. He wrote it down. He said, "That explains why they were surprised. The new owner came home to strangers in his living room." The report noted he stood in the doorway until he saw the bat swing. He retreated and waited for sirens. He pressed charges. He had insurance, but the deductible was high. The restitution would not be. The officer asked why my parents would do this. I didn't answer right away. I looked at my calendar instead. It was a Tuesday. I had a stand-up at 10, a deliverable due by end of day. My coffee was cold. I told him there had been a dispute over money and a house that no longer belonged to me. I told him they didn't know I'd sold it. He said that mattered. When I hung up, I sat on the edge of the couch and counted breaths. The couch belonged to someone else, too. I was in another state. The boxes were still stacked along one wall. Labels faced out: office, kitchen, winter coats. I hadn't unpacked the file box yet, the one with the deed, the closing statement, the wire confirmation. I knew exactly which folder held the proof. There is a moment when facts line up and the noise drops out. Not relief, not fear, just clarity. I saw the chain of events backward: the bat, the broken window, the wrong address, the sale, the refusal, the dinner table, the spreadsheets, the savings. The line between family and property had been drawn years earlier. I had stepped back from it. They had crossed it. If you've ever watched a situation unfold and realized the ending was already written before you arrived, you know the feeling I'm describing. The paperwork was done. The records were filed. Ownership had changed hands. The system had its answer. To understand how my parents ended up destroying a stranger's living room while looking for mine, you have to start before the police report, before the sale, before the knock on my door. You have to start with a number that followed me for years, and a table where everyone already knew it. 5 years earlier, my world fit inside a studio apartment that measured just under 400 square feet. I knew because the lease listed it in bold, and because every step from the bed to the sink took exactly 6 paces. The window faced a brick wall. At certain hours, the neighbor's television bled through the plaster. I learned his schedule without ever meeting him. Each morning started at 6:10. I boiled water on a single burner and poured it over grounds I bought in bulk. The receipt went into a folder labeled Food. I took the bus at 6:47 because it cost less than keeping a car. The monthly pass was $82.50. I kept the stubs, even after the ink faded. My paycheck landed every other Friday at 12:02 a.m. I split it the same way every time: rent, utilities, transit, groceries, then savings. The savings transfer was automatic, but I still checked the confirmation email. I worked in software, mostly maintenance work that didn't make headlines. Bug fixes, late deployments, on-call rotations that stretched weekends into Mondays. When friends texted from bars, I sent thumbs-up emojis and closed another ticket. I took freelance contracts at night. The invoices were plain: hourly rate, hours worked, total. I tracked them in a spreadsheet that grew line by line. When the total crossed $10,000, I printed the page and filed it. I did the same at $25,000, at $50,000. The printer ink ran out once. I replaced it instead of ordering takeout. Clothes came from thrift stores. Shoes lasted until the soles thinned. Birthdays were acknowledged with cupcakes bought at gas stations because they were $2 cheaper after 8 p.m. I did not complain. I counted. Every dollar had a place to go. On Saturdays, I drove to my parents' house for dinner. The drive took 40 minutes. I left at 3:50 to avoid traffic. My mother cooked the same meals in rotation. My father sat in the same chair and commented on his back. My sister arrived with her husband and a new idea. I listened. I smiled. I did not bring my folders inside. When I found the house, it was on a street with trees that dropped leaves in neat piles. 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a kitchen window that caught the morning light. The listing price was just within range if nothing went wrong. I printed the photos and tucked them into the savings folder. I did not tell anyone yet. I wanted the inspection first, then the appraisal, then the approval letter with my name spelled correctly. The number reached $120,000 in late spring. I remember the date because the confirmation email arrived at 12:01 a.m., 1 minute earlier than usual. I sat on the edge of my bed and let the phone rest in my hands until the screen dimmed. The next day, I scheduled a showing. The week after that, I called the lender. The process came with its own language: earnest money, contingencies, closing costs. I learned it the way I learned everything else, by reading and asking questions until there were fewer surprises. I still went to dinner every Saturday. I still listened. I still kept my folders closed. What I didn't know was that my numbers were already on the table, discussed without me, reduced to a figure that could be reassigned. I would learn that soon enough. The dinner that changed everything fell on a Saturday in October. The air felt tighter the moment I walked in, like a room that had been closed too long. My mother's voice carried from the kitchen, too bright, too prepared. My father didn't look up right away. He kept his hands folded on the table, fingers worrying the edge of a placemat. My sister and her husband stood near the window, heads close together. Papers were stacked on the sideboard, squared neatly, as if they belonged there. We sat. Plates were passed, silverware clinked. No one touched the papers at first. I noticed the thickness of the stack, the weight of it when my sister finally moved it closer. Glossy pages, color charts, headings printed in a clean sans serif font. I recognized the formatting from online templates. Someone had spent time on this. My mother cleared her throat. She used my sister's full name. That was the signal. The presentation began. Revenue projections, market size, timelines. My sister spoke quickly, as if momentum might replace certainty. Her husband nodded at intervals, tapping the table when a number appeared he liked. The numbers climbed in smooth arcs. 2 years, double returns, a margin that left room for error without ever naming it. I watched my father's eyes move from page to page. He did not ask questions. My mother watched me. Not my face. My hands. She had always been good at that. The papers slid closer to my place setting without anyone acknowledging the movement. At one point, my sister paused and looked at me directly. She said my name, and then mentioned the house I'd been looking at, the neighborhood, the price range. She did not ask if she was correct. She stated it the way you state a fact you've already confirmed. My mother added the number, 120,000. She said it softly, as if volume might change meaning. The room went quiet. I heard the refrigerator cycle on. I heard a car pass outside. I said I wasn't investing my savings. The sentence landed flat. No raised voice, no explanation, just a boundary, placed where the papers met the table. My sister's face folded in on itself. Her husband leaned back and crossed his arms. My mother's chair scraped as she shifted forward. She spoke about timing, about family, about helping when help is needed. My father finally looked at me. He said there were consequences to selfishness. He said family stands together. I asked about the last 2 ventures, the remortgage, the calls that came late at night, the emergency room visit after my father's chest pain. The room stiffened. My sister stood up and left. Her husband followed. The door closed harder than necessary. My mother's voice sharpened. She compared us. She said one of us had always been more talented. My father said the words that ended the evening. He said if I didn't give the money, I wasn't part of the family. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I stood. I pushed my chair in. I told them I wasn't giving the money. My coat was on the back of the chair. I took it and walked out. The drive back to my apartment took longer than usual. I changed my phone number the next day. The savings stayed where it was. A year later, I signed closing documents with a pen that skipped on the last page. The house keys were cold in my palm. The dinner stopped. The silence lasted 5 years. The silence after I left wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Messages went unanswered because there were none. Holidays passed without invitations. My new number stayed quiet. I learned how absence can be measured by routine. Saturdays freed up, a gas tank that lasted longer, a calendar with fewer obligations penciled in. The house settled into my life the way a document settles into a file. I set up a desk in the spare room. I labeled drawers. I learned which floorboard creaked near the hallway and which window needed an extra turn to seal in winter. Utility bills arrived with my name printed cleanly at the top. I paid them on the due date. The mortgage statement came monthly, principal and interest separated by a thin line. I tracked both. Work expanded to fill the space my family had vacated. Promotions came with new responsibilities and a revised title block on internal directories. I kept copies of offer letters. I kept copies of performance reviews. When I took vacation, I stayed home and repainted the bedroom. The receipt for the paint went into a folder labeled Improvements. I wrote the date on it. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard updates the way you hear weather reports from another city. My sister's business had taken off this time. Photos appeared online, new house, travel, dinners that came with linen napkins. I noted the timing. 5 years after the dinner. I closed the browser without commenting. In the 4th year, I met Sebastian through a professional group. We talked about work first, then logistics, then plans. He lived in another state. We counted miles and flight times. We scheduled visits around deliverables. He noticed my folders the first time he came to stay. He didn't open them. He didn't ask. That mattered. We talked about the future in terms that could be verified. Cost of living comparisons, school districts, commute times. At one point, I pulled up my mortgage balance and asked if selling would make sense. He didn't push. He asked what I wanted. I said I wanted flexibility. We left it there. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning at 7:12 a.m. It went to an address I rarely checked. The subject line used urgency without detail. The body was short. It asked me to come home. It used the phrase life and death. I stared at the sender's name until the screen dimmed. I checked the header. It was real. I replied with a sentence. I set a date. When Saturday came, I sat in my car for 10 minutes before getting out. The street looked narrower. The paint on the houses looked thinner. 2 cars sat in the driveway that hadn't been there before. Both were new. Both were expensive. I noted the plates. Inside, the furniture was arranged for effect. Everyone was present. No one spoke at first. My mother looked older. My father's chair hadn't moved. My sister's eyes stayed on the floor. Her husband held her hand. When the explanation came, it came in pieces. A business collapse, a debt figure stated once and not repeated, a sense of time running out. I asked what they wanted from me. The answer came quickly. They knew I had a house. They suggested I sell it. They suggested I could start again. The phrase, "nice apartment," appeared. I looked around at their walls, their photos, the place that had closed to me for years. I said no. I said it once. When I left that day, I didn't block the address immediately. I waited until I got home. Then I did. The boundary felt familiar. It had held before. I assumed it would again. The week after I left my parents' house passed without incident. My phone stayed quiet, my inbox filled with work threads and calendar reminders. Sebastian called every evening. We talked through dinner plans and timelines, the kind of conversations that rely on specifics rather than reassurance. By Friday, the visit felt like a closed file. The following Tuesday, I was in my kitchen measuring coffee grounds when I heard a car door outside. It was early. I hadn't scheduled deliveries. I looked through the front window and saw my parents on the walkway, moving with purpose, not hesitation. My mother's coat was buttoned wrong. My father's hands were in his pockets. I opened the door far enough to step onto the threshold. They said my name like it was a key. I asked how they found me. My mother answered without shame. She said Melissa had hired a private investigator. She said it as if it were a referral, not a violation. My father's eyes moved past me, taking inventory. He commented on the space, on the light, on how much one person needs. They stepped inside before I said anything else. The door closed behind them. My mother walked a perimeter of the living room, touching surfaces, lifting a frame to see what was behind it. My father stood near the window, measuring distance to the street. He mentioned resale. He mentioned apartments again. The word easily appeared more than once. I told them to leave. My mother spoke about danger. She said calls were coming in. She said names I didn't recognize. My father said the police couldn't help. He said these people didn't care about paperwork. I asked why the cars in the driveway back home were still there. My sister needed them for work. That was the answer. When my mother blocked the doorway, I took out my phone and dialed. My father grabbed my arm. His grip was tight and brief, like a correction. I told him to let go. He did. The call connected. I told the operator there were people in my house who wouldn't leave. My mother stepped back. She said this wasn't over. After they left, I sat on the floor with my back against the door until my breathing slowed. I checked the locks twice. I called Sebastian. I told him what had happened. He asked if I was safe. He asked what I wanted to do. I said I didn't want them showing up again. That afternoon, I called the realtor I'd spoken to months earlier. I asked about listing quickly. I asked about pricing for speed. She said there might be a buyer already looking. She said timing mattered. 3 days later, an offer arrived. It was lower than ideal. It was clean. I accepted. The closing date was set. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. I signed disclosures and scanned IDs. Sebastian drove in to help pack. We labeled boxes and stacked them by the door. On the last day, I walked through the empty rooms. The light still fell the same way. I locked the door and handed the keys to the agent. We left the state that afternoon. The address changed in my files. The system updated. Ownership transferred. I assumed the house would fade into memory the way other things had. It didn't. Living with Sebastian meant learning new rhythms. His mornings started later than mine. The coffee machine was louder. The desk by the window faced a different direction. I set up my laptop on the second day and logged into the same systems I always had. The address on my profile changed. Payroll confirmed it by email. I saved the confirmation. We spent evenings scrolling through listings in his area, comparing taxes and commute times. I kept my closing statement in a folder on my desktop, the PDF named with the date. The wire confirmation sat beside it. When the proceeds hit my account, I split the amount into 2 transfers and left a balance that wouldn't attract attention. I did not tell anyone where the money was. I did not need to. A month passed. The boxes emptied. The new routine settled. On a Tuesday morning, my phone rang from a number with my old area code. I let it ring once before answering. The voice identified himself as Officer Hughes with the Lincoln Police Department. He asked if I was Vivian Smith. He asked if Wade and Susan Smith were my parents. He asked if 847 Maple Street was a property I used to own. I told him I had sold the house the previous month. He asked for the date. I gave it. He asked for the buyer's name. I said I didn't have it memorized, but could provide the title company. He said that would help. He explained there had been a break-in the night before. Forced entry, extensive damage. The homeowner had returned to find 2 people inside, smashing furniture. Baseball bats were involved. The damage estimate was preliminary but high. The suspects claimed they believed the house still belonged to me. They said they were sending a message. I sat down on the couch and looked at the wall clock. It was 10:14 a.m. Sebastian was in the other room on a call. I covered the phone and told him the police were on the line. He muted himself and came over. The officer asked if my parents knew I'd sold the house. I said no. He said that mattered. He said ownership records showed the transfer clearly. He said the new owner wanted to press charges. He said there was no ambiguity in the report. I told him about the private investigator, about the visit to my house, about the request to sell. He took notes. He asked if there had been threats. I said they had refused to leave and grabbed my arm. He asked if I'd reported it. I said I hadn't. He said that was common. After the call, Sebastian sat beside me. He said they could have been hurt. He said the homeowner could have been armed. I pictured the wrong door opening, the wrong person inside, the wrong conclusion drawn in seconds. Over the next weeks, updates came through formal channels and informal ones. A charge list, a court date, a lawyer retained. My parents admitted guilt in exchange for avoiding jail time. Restitution was ordered. $40,000 for damages, additional fees, court costs. The total approached $60,000. A friend from home called with the aftermath. My parents had sold their house to pay it. There was no other way. After the court took its share, they gave what remained to my sister to cover her debt. Later, it emerged that the creditors weren't violent. They were an investment firm preparing to sue. Paperwork, not threats. I listened. I said thank you. I did not call my parents. That night, Sebastian cooked. We ate at the counter. He asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. The word fit. The system had spoken. The message had landed somewhere else. After the court date passed, information reached me in fragments. It came through friends who still lived nearby, through forwarded messages stripped of commentary, through dates and amounts that could be verified. I did not ask for updates. I accepted them when they arrived. My parents moved into a rental with my sister and her husband. The address changed again. 2 bedrooms, 1 lease, 4 names. The timeline was short because the restitution schedule was strict. Payments were due monthly. Miss one and the agreement collapsed. I noted the first due date. I noted the second. What struck me was the sequence. The house was sold first. Then the fees were paid. Then the remainder went to my sister. The order matched the demand they had made of me, almost word for word, except the asset was theirs. I did not comment on the symmetry. I filed it away. A few weeks later, the explanation about the creditors became clearer. An investment firm, standard terms. Missed payments, notices sent by certified mail. The threat was litigation. No one had been following anyone. No one had made physical threats. The urgency had been real only in the sense that deadlines are real. The rest had been narrative. I thought back to the day my parents stood in my living room and spoke about danger. The way my mother touched the furniture. The way my father calculated space. The way urgency had been used to compress my choices. It all fit into a pattern that didn't require speculation anymore. Attempts to reach me followed. Not directly, never directly. A friend mentioned my mother had asked about me. Another said my father wanted to explain. The words apology and misunderstanding appeared. I declined each time. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I said no and ended the call. Sebastian watched this from a careful distance. He didn't suggest forgiveness or closure. He asked what boundaries I wanted to keep. I said the existing ones were working. We reviewed practical matters instead. We toured houses. We compared inspection reports. We chose one with a yard that needed work. The offer included contingencies. They were met. The closing date was set. On the morning we signed, the agent slid the documents across the table and pointed where to initial. I noticed how familiar the process felt. The pen skipped again. The numbers lined up. Ownership transferred. We took copies. We left with keys that were warm from being handled. Life adjusted around that. My work schedule changed slightly. My title changed again. The folder labeled Improvements reopened. We painted. We planted. Receipts went into envelopes. I labeled them by month. Occasionally, I thought about the people who had once insisted I sell a house that was mine. The thought didn't linger. The system had resolved what conversation could not. Records had replaced arguments. Consequences had followed actions without needing my participation. One afternoon, a final message came through Catherine, a friend who had been careful not to editorialize. She said my mother wanted me to know they were sorry. She said they understood they had handled everything wrong. I asked Catherine to thank her for passing it along. I asked her not to do it again. That evening, Sebastian and I sat on the back steps and watched the light change. The yard smelled like cut grass. The house behind us was quiet. I checked my phone once and put it face down. There was nothing else to document. The last updates arrived without urgency. No subject lines marked important. No calls outside of business hours. The court record closed. The restitution balance showed paid in full. The case number moved from active to archived. When I searched it once, out of habit, the result was unchanged. Time returned to its ordinary shape. Mornings began with the same alarm. I reviewed calendars and adjusted deadlines. The garden took longer than expected. The soil needed conditioning. I kept the receipt for compost folded inside the hardware store bag until I could file it. Small tasks replaced large ones. The scale felt right. Sebastian proposed on a quiet afternoon without an audience. He didn't schedule it. He didn't film it. He took a ring from a box he'd kept in his desk drawer and asked a question that didn't require justification. We set a date and a budget. We agreed on a backyard ceremony. We wrote numbers down and crossed some out. The list stayed on the fridge until it was complete. Work continued to move forward. A promotion came with a new reporting line and a revised compensation statement. I read it twice. I saved it to the same folder as the others. The increase made future plans easier. It didn't change past decisions. Every so often, someone from my hometown would reach out with a comment that started as news and ended as advice. They asked if I missed my parents. They asked if I thought reconciliation was possible. I answered with facts. 5 years without contact. A demand to liquidate my only asset. A private investigator. An uninvited entry. A police report. A criminal case. The conversation usually stopped there. When doubt appeared, it didn't stay long. It came as a question about alternatives, about whether another choice might have reduced damage. I checked the sequence again. The refusal had been clear. The escalation had not come from me. The record supported that. I returned to whatever I had been doing. On weekends, we worked in the yard. We planted perennials that wouldn't need much attention. We learned which areas held water after rain. Neighbors waved and introduced themselves. One asked where we'd moved from. I gave the state, not the story. That was enough. The house filled in around us. Boxes disappeared. Walls took on familiar marks. The desk faced the window again, this time with a view of trees instead of brick. I logged in and out of systems that recognized me by employee number and password, not by history. That mattered more than I'd expected. The last message about my family came indirectly, months later. They were still renting. The arrangement was tense. No one was surprised. I thanked the messenger and changed the subject. There was nothing left to clarify. Near the end of a long day, Sebastian asked if I wanted to talk about it. I said there wasn't much to say. We stood in the kitchen and checked the oven timer. The light over the sink flickered once and steadied. I replaced the bulb the next morning and wrote the date on the box before recycling it. If there's a conclusion to draw, it lives in the paperwork more than the narrative. Ownership matters. Boundaries that are documented hold. Systems respond to actions without negotiating feelings. When those systems took over, the conflict stopped reaching me. I didn't win anything. I kept what was already mine and let the rest move through channels designed for it. The quiet that followed wasn't dramatic. It was stable. It held. The final distance settled without ceremony. No letters arrived asking for another meeting. No intermediaries followed up. The absence became consistent enough to trust. When my phone rang, it was for work or neighbors or delivery confirmations. The number from my old area code did not appear again. Planning the wedding turned into a sequence of checklists. Permits for the backyard, a deposit for chairs, a contract for catering that specified times and quantities. We chose a date that worked around my release schedule and his quarterly close. The paperwork was straightforward. I signed where indicated and saved copies. On a weekday afternoon, I walked the property line with the survey in hand. The stakes were still in place from the last owner's measurement. The corners were marked clearly. I folded the paper and put it back in its sleeve. Knowing where things begin and end changes how you move through space. At work, a long project closed successfully. The final report went out at 4:58 p.m., 2 minutes ahead of the deadline. I archived the thread. The team moved on. That's how systems work when they're allowed to do their job. Once, while sorting old files, I came across the first lease from the studio apartment. 400 square feet, 6 paces from bed to sink. I remembered the way the number had felt then, tight but purposeful. I recycled the paper and washed my hands afterward. Catherine called one last time. She said my parents had asked her to pass along that they understood now, that they saw what they had done, that they wished things were different. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I thanked her and said I didn't want messages relayed anymore. She agreed. She respected that. That evening, Sebastian and I sat at the table and reviewed the final guest list. We crossed off a name we'd been unsure about. We added another. The pen left a faint indentation where it paused. We decided on string lights instead of lanterns. The decision felt complete. If there was any reckoning left, it wasn't mine to conduct. The choices my family made moved through legal channels and financial constraints without my involvement. The outcomes followed those paths to their ends. I observed from a distance that felt intentional rather than defensive. The morning light in this house comes in through the kitchen window at a lower angle than the last one. It hits the counter first, then the floor. I know the timing now. I make coffee and wait for it. The routine is ordinary, that's the point. Near the end of the day, when the house is quiet and the yard has settled, I think about how ownership, once established, carries weight without argument. I think about how boundaries, once enforced by record and action, don't need repetition. And I think about the people who learn this only after they push too far. If you've stayed with this account to the end, you already understand what it means to choose stability over pressure, to let systems speak where conversations fail, and to carry on without spectacle. That understanding doesn't need instruction, it recognizes itself. The house holds, the records match, the noise stays elsewhere.